Beautiful day. These fish just aren't doing what we want them to do. It's fun though. All right. So a little late in the morning to get going on this, but better late than never, right? I just finished a 2-hour podcast with a good guy, real good guy. I don't know what the name of his podcast is. I'm sorry, I just know his first name, last name, but I will, for all you outdoor enthusiasts out there who want to hear me speak about hunting for a couple hours with this guy, real good guy. I will post up the link to his podcast when he posts it up of our 2-hour session this morning, all right? So, moving along. We've got some more important voices in mind to be heard. So let's get into it. And I'm going to get into a couple of recents to start off with, all right? This is titled Former Military / Law Enforcement Officer - Elk Hunter. It's the title of this email. Please don't use my name. I got you. Hello, Steve. It's taken me a couple of years to decide to write this. I'm not the type to do this normally. That's common. My dad grew up hunting and fishing in a very small town on the Continental Divide in Colorado back in 1932. He had some strange experiences with mysterious lights on one of the mountains. They could see a bright light at random times throughout his childhood, always on the same mountain. No one in the town knew what it was. He also believed there was a native Indian burial area or a camp near the town because he found many arrowheads and debris on a specific hill. Back in the mid-1980s, my dad and I were hunting elk in the first rifle season, just east of this small town. My dad knew this land like the back of his hand. He knew the sounds and the animals of this area. He was raised with 10 brothers and sisters and was outside most of the day every day. His family survived mainly on the game he and his brothers harvested throughout the Great Depression. They would hunt sage grouse and cottontails on their way to school in the mornings, and deer on the way home. Sometimes my grandfather would come and pick them up on a railroad putt-putt car, being the foreman for the railroad in that area. I was about 20 years old at this time in the 80s. We were hunting a ridge line in fairly thick pine. My dad was about 50 yards above me as we were traversing this ridge line horizontally. It was a perfect Colorado day, blue skies, soft, quiet ground full of pine needles and aspen leaves. The squirrels and birds were talking. Nice cool breeze in our faces. Beautiful sunbeams glistening in the remaining leaves. Musky smells of the pines. Back then I had better than 20/10 vision. My dad had found some sign, and we heard what sounded like antlers rubbing on bark. We moved slow and steady in that direction. As we were stalking along, I noticed it had become dead silent. I could not hear the squirrels or birds anymore. No breeze. I could feel the sweat on my forehead trickling down. It was a weird feeling. I wasn't frightened at this point, just a different feeling. And I glanced at my dad, and he was stalking low and very serious in concentration, which in turn made me concentrate a bit more. I had about 300 yards of view through the trees at this time. We started to hear a very low tone grunting. Being young and inexperienced, bracket stupid end bracket, I thought it could be a bear. I looked at my dad, and he shrugged his shoulders like he didn't know what it was. And we kept getting closer to the sound, but I could see nothing. The sound kept getting closer and closer, and I still couldn't see anything. And as we kept going, this is where I started getting concerned. I was carrying a 30-06, and my dad had a 243. The sound this creature was making made me feel very uneasy, and that we should have brought a 50 cal, because whatever it was making these sounds sounded very large. The grunting was low in tone, and I couldn't imagine what animal was making that sound. Steve, this freaked me out. We got about what I would say is 50 feet away from that sound. It was so loud. It sounded so close I could touch it, but I couldn't understand why I couldn't see whatever it was. And out of nowhere, we heard this creature crashing through the trees, crushing branches and snapping tree limbs, and breathing very loud as it ran away. I was very scared at this point, but relieved it was heading away from us. The breeze came back and the squirrels started talking again. My dad walked over to me and said he had no idea what that was, and he knew all the animals of this area. He had never heard of anything like this before. I know sound is funny in the woods sometimes, but I could have seen a fly on an elk's butt at 100 yards and I saw nothing. No movement whatsoever. I hunted again after that, but I've never gone back to that area and I never will. I can't remember the hunt in or out, just this experience. It's frozen in my mind. I can still feel the sweat on my forehead when I think about it. Recently, I just ate breakfast. Recently, I spoke with a young cousin that outfits in that area, and he's had a worse experience. He described the sound exactly as I did, but he saw it. He said it was a sabe, a very large one that walked him out of an area he was scouting. It followed him all the way out. The experience hasn't daunted him, but he has become a very cautious young man. Stay safe, Steve, and God bless. God bless you too, and you stay safe too. And I appreciate you sending that in. You know, it's funny, I remember before I asked publicly a lot of people have that experience of hearing those sounds of trees getting pushed over, branches getting ripped up, tore off, everything getting demolished as this thing laid waste to the forest at the side of the mountain going through, right? And I'm still curious if anybody who has had that experience happen, I would love to see the trail. Now, a lot of you hunters out there, you should be able to find that trail of carnage, right? It's like for me, when I'm tracking a moose or an elk, something significant in body size, after it's been arrowed or shot by a hunter or myself, and you can hear it ripping through that thick brush, breaking shit. When you know what to look for, especially with a moose rack, you can find all those broken branches, and you can track him fairly successfully that way if he's running through thick spruce, right? So, knowing that I can find those broken branches from a 800, 1,200 pound bull something blasting through the timber, I would like to think that a lot of you out there who have experienced what this man just emailed with us, you should be able to find that debris, that carnage trail through the timber, right? Should be able to. I'm not saying you will be able to, because I'm not saying that is possibly not what's really going down. You may hear those sounds, but those sounds may not necessarily... Now, those sounds may not necessarily be coming from that forest in front of us. Possibly. This is going to be a little confusing trying to get my words out of my head. The sounds of these branches and trees getting pushed over and broken in half and debris getting absolutely annihilated as whatever it is blowing through the timber. What I'm saying is there's a possibility that those sounds aren't being created right there in that physical forest in front of the experiencer. I'm saying there's a chance of that. Right? It's a little confusing to say that and think it, but I know what I'm thinking. Anyway, so to help with additional puzzle piece missing, is there anyone out there who has experienced something like this? That allegedly physical sounds being created by a physical being going through that timber in front of you. Is there anybody who's experienced that and gone and seen the shrapnel left over from that incident? That's what I'm curious about. And if so, would it be too much to ask for somebody who's experienced that to go videotape that trail, that carnage trail of all those branches broken, and share with us. I would love to see that. Or if there's somebody close by to me, invite me over and I'll go look at the Carnage Trail with you. If those sounds were created from that. I hope I'm making sense. Probably not. I hope so. This topic gets confusing the deeper you dive, right? Hopefully everybody's been figuring that out quite easily. Now, enough babbling. Let's get into this one. This is recent as well. This is titled Michigan Part 1. Dear Steve, when my sister and I were 11 and 12, we lived in a small town in mid-eastern Michigan. Right across the street from the Kawkaulin River. Kawkaulin River. Pronounced Kawkaulin. The Kawkaulin River runs out to the Saginaw Bay, which tributaries run into Lake Huron. Our street was gravel, no street lights, and maybe 1.5 miles long. Even though we had followed the same path from our house through a small grove of thick trees, across a fur-lane highway, across the railroad tracks, where we used to jump off the railway bridge to swim, through a cemetery. At the farthest left end of the cemetery was a path going through sort of a thick swampy area, about 100 yards long, that led to a dirt road that we would go left on. On the far right of the cemetery was the Kawkaulin River, and right behind the cemetery were thick bushes and trees. Behind these trees on the right were 2 abandoned cabins that were being taken over by nature. One was red and one was green. And for some reason, we never explored this area. Never explored the woods or cabin, which, looking back, was quite odd because we explored everything. We'd been using this cut through hundreds, if not thousands of times, all times of the day and night. It was early 70s, so my sister and I decided to sneak out of the house again to follow the same path we always did, to get to our friend's house, which was about 7 miles away. It was around midnight when we got to the path at the end of the cemetery. For some reason, this night was very creepy. We got to a small opening in the path where some moonlight showed through the trees. We were about halfway through the path and everything just felt off. I stopped because what struck me was there was no sound. Usually walking through this path day or night, all you could hear were crickets, katydids, K-A-T, citidids, are they citidids or cicadas? Whatever, sorry. It's spelled K-A-T-Y-D-I-D-S. Tree frogs, mosquitoes buzzing around your head, and the wind moving through the trees. This night was absolute quiet. Right after I asked my sister, why is there no sound? Why is it so quiet? The loudest, most terrifying scream ripped right through us. As soon as the scream started, we heard 25 to 30 dogs barking. But the dogs' sounds were muffled, like the dogs were barking through a mouthful of cotton. The sounds were coming from ahead and to the right of us, probably 40 feet away, exactly where the middle of the cabin's driveway would have been. We were frozen in terror. Every hair on our bodies standing at attention. The scream lasted for 30 or more seconds. The scream and the dogs barking cut off. Just instant, nothing less. There was no sound. The silence afterwards was terrifying. I believed at that time I had just heard a woman being murdered. Like the fools we were, I just whispered, "Run," to my sister. And instead of running home, we ran towards the scream. And once we hit the dirt road, we turned left and kept on running. I scoured the newspaper every day for 2 weeks to see if someone had been murdered, finding nothing. After that night, we never took that shortcut again, day or night. We took the long way. We never told anyone about it, and only recently began talking about it. That scream was so long and so loud that at the time I just knew that someone was being murdered. I'd heard my dad beating my mom enough times to know what pain screaming sounded like. That's dark and unfortunate. As for the dog's muffled barking, I have no answer. And all the hundreds of times we had walked that path, we never heard a dog bark. There's only one house on that dirt road, about 200 yards straight up from the path on the left-hand side. They never owned a dog. I also recall before the scream there was no sound. We should have heard the thing inhale before a scream that loud and that long. Fort Lee, Virginia. In the late 70s, I joined the Army. After my Advanced Individual Training, AIT, I was sent to Fort Lee, Virginia. Since they didn't have a position for my specialty, I was set up doing shit duties, such as a group of us being taken to the middle of the woods to rake leaves. Yes, we raked leaves. It was like digging a foxhole just to fill it back in, or being sent to the motor pool to change tires on 5-ton and 2.5-ton trucks. Well, one day, 4 of us were volunteered for guard duty. We were told at such and such time, go to the armory, get your weapon, M16A1, a 10-round magazine with live bullets, and you will be picked up and taken to the site. We were picked up and driven out of nowhere, but in the middle of the woods. It took a while. It was dusk. When we arrived, all I could see by the Jeep's headlights was a 10-foot tall fence covered with razor wire, and inside of that, a 10-foot wide dirt road with another 10-foot tall fence with razor wire on top. I could see a 10-foot tall watchtower with 4-foot wide walls and a roof over it. You had to climb a ladder and come through the floor of the watchtower to get in. When I got dropped off, I was given a walkie-talkie and told, if you see anything at all, shoot it. Once you get in the tower, lock the latch behind you. I'm like, what the F? I'd never even been told shoot anything other than targets before this. Once in the tower, I took over the area we were guarding. It looked like we were overlooking a small valley about 100 yards below us, 200 yards long and 200 yards wide. And soon after, I started getting calls on the walkie. I hear something. I see something. Should I shoot? I told everyone to wait. I still, at the time, had never heard of Bigfoot or knew anything about orbs. I was in the rear left tower and could see below me at the time what I thought were other personnel. One using a flashlight with a dark blue filter, someone using a light with a light blue filter, and another with an amber filter. I was like, where in the hell did they get those filters? My Army issue flashlight only came with a clear or red filter. Well, whoever was in that valley were being very loud, and they were whooping, and I mean loud. Whoop, 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 breaking the tree limbs and slamming rocks together. And I knew this because when I heard it, the picture of very large, hairy hands smashing 2 rocks together, flashing in my mind. Whoop, whoop, snap, crash. I thought, what a bunch of idiots. If they are on maneuvers in real life, they will get themselves killed. I called my people, told them, don't shoot. It's probably just a bunch of drunk jarheads, Marines, being assholes. After I had the picture of the hands smashing rocks together in my head, even though there was snow on the ground and it was about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, my brain began telling me that I would be much warmer if I went to sleep. Let me read that again. My brain began telling me that I would be much warmer if I went to sleep and that it would be safe. I've never slept in guard duty. I was suddenly filled with peace and exhaustion. I took off my leather combat boots, lay down on the floor of the guard tower, and had my M16 in my arms and my walkie-talkie beside me and fell asleep instantly. End of email. Cliffhanger. All right, there you go. We will be eagerly awaiting part 2. That's an odd one, isn't it? It's not your common email sent in, but there you go, you guys. Share it. And all I can do is wait for the next one. Now, that description of that place sounds a little odd, doesn't it? But I wonder, Google Earth comes to mind. Something like that you should be able to find it on Google Earth. But from what we're learning, what we know now, I wonder just how much of Google Earth is censored before it comes to play on the Google Earth app. Right? I mean, come on. You can't... It'd be pretty hard to believe right now with what we know it would be pretty tough to accept that every single thing on the face of the planet is available to our eyes via Google Earth. Probably not, right? But if it is, we should be able to find that facility. You'd think. Anyway, interesting email. We'll see what comes. Who's next? Now, another thing I remembered, I took note last night. We've got this hot tub outside. It's half of it's open to the straight sky, and the other half's got a little bit of roof over it. But when it's clear out, like last night, it was clear and cold, and we're sitting out there getting warmed up after our long day of steelhead fishing, hiking and stuff, and we were looking at the sky. And the second I look up, you can see what we understand are allegedly satellites. One going, ripped along the sky. And then one a little brighter going this way. Right? And then all of a sudden two going like that. It's endless. When you look up in the sky without light pollution, it's endless. Those things that we see up in the sky. And then what I said to Sarah was, like, you know what? With aircraft control, towers, airports, obviously our jetliners, any plane has to take off at a safe time, has to enter the sky at a safe time. And also, everybody's got specific routes and heights to fly at, depending on what type of aircraft it is, I would imagine. And everybody knows where everybody is and when it's safe to fly this way and that way and who to expect. Now, what I'm getting at is, how the hell do you launch a satellite today? Right? Like, obviously, there's probably a straight-up answer for it. I don't have it for me because I'm just trying to picture it. I'm like, how do they do that? So you've got shit floating around up there, allegedly, from probably the very first rocket days, the very first satellite days. How do you launch a satellite today? Because you are going to have to know the elevation of every single piece of debris up there, what route it's taking, right? And then what? Then you're going to have to go with the spin of the planet, weather patterns, who knows what the weather's doing way up there, and you're going to have to launch that satellite from the ground into that frickin' what's probably a big shit show galactic spaghetti route of things ripping around. And then that one satellite you launch is going to have to find its own path and allegedly go like this around the planet without hitting anything, ever. Huh? That confuses the shit out of me. How could that even be possible with the amount of... I wonder if there's even a website somewhere that says how many satellites are in the atmosphere, above it, whatever, today. Are you following? Am I sounding like a complete ding-dong? I don't understand how you launch a multi-million-dollar satellite today and set it on its course safely, missing everything else doing the same thing up there. Because I'm sitting there looking at the sky, and this shit is coming from all different directions. It's all over the map. It's not going side by side in the same direction. This stuff's crisscrossing, going this way, going that way. If they are satellites. Right? How do they do it? Anybody know? Email me. I'd like to hear about it. All right. Now, just came across another one. And it is a long one. Real long. And I don't recall reading it. I tried to sift through a little bit. It's a little bit of an older one, but I do recognize the name at the end. And I think this may be the man who had that Sasquatch pick him up and look at him. Maybe. We'll see. So I'm going to start this. We'll see how the time goes. If I have to, I'll do this in 2 parts and I'll finish up the rest of it tomorrow. All right? Because this is a long one. But I don't want to bypass it again if I hadn't read it before. So here we go. All right? Hi, Steve. I want to say thank you for sharing my face-to-face encounter as a boy and my rant on the Bigfoot community several times. Oh, that's the one. Okay. Gotcha. I knew it's from somewhere. I never expected that, your name, I mean. I never expected that, and I feel honored that you would share my story even once. I'm very grateful for your kindness. I want to share my subsequent encounters with you, as they too are very strange and unusual. My third encounter, possibly having missing 411 associations, and here they are. All right, so I have posted this video over the years, previous video from this author, of his experience with the so-called Bigfoot community. and his face-to-face encounter and what he learned over the years. All right? That's one of those. I think I titled it, I feel this is very important for everyone to hear videos. That's who this is. I don't think I've read this, unfortunately. So this is my second Bigfoot encounter. I like to share an encounter I had about 15 years ago when I was first moved here to the Pacific Northwest. My ex-wife, my young son, and myself had just moved to the area and were trying to figure out where we wanted to live. We did a lot of camping. The first few months we were here, and we wanted to explore all of the amazing places in the Puget Sound area. I really wanted to do some camping at Mount Rainier National Park, mostly because of my interest in Sasquatch. I'd read many encounters with these beings in and around the Mount Rainier area, and I knew they had a strong presence around the mountain. And at the time, I still had a very strong fear of them, and still consider myself an avid Bigfoot researcher. But I wanted to overcome my lifelong fear and to try to reach out to them. Not the greatest idea, I know, but I needed to overcome this obstacle in my life. I still periodically had the nightmares with Sasquatch, and I truly wanted to be done with them. I'd always felt these beings had psychic abilities, and after years and years of reading others' accounts of paranormal or psychic interactions with them, I felt that reaching out to them in a psychic way was probably the only way to actually have interaction with them. So, we traveled down Route 410 next to the White River, northeast of Mount Rainier, and found a beautiful area to set up a tent, a camp, and a camp next to the river. It was so beautiful. The area where we set up our tent was pristine, clear, flat ground. This detail is important to the story, as you will see later. Nestled within some majestic hemlock trees, it was about noon when we set up camp, and throughout the day I was sending a message out with my mind, or trying to send a telepathic greeting, introducing myself and telling anyone that could hear me that I was a friend and wanted to say hello. I invited the Sasquatch people to come and visit us, yet I did ask them to not scare us, because I was trying to overcome my fear of them. I said all this in my mental projections into the forest. All that day and into the early evening, I would periodically send out these friendly messages, with some trepidation I might add. I felt nothing in return. I didn't sense anything unusual or odd. Everything seemed peaceful, and I had serious doubts that these messages were even being received. Evening came, and we had dinner and enjoyed a nice campfire. It was in the late spring when this took place. We soon felt sleepy and set in for bed. My ex-wife and my son fell asleep almost immediately, and before I dozed off in my sleeping bag, I wanted to try one last time to send a friendly message. I started telepathically sending my greetings, and something very strange happened. This is very hard to articulate into words, but I will do my best to describe it. I felt this sort of a connection with something after about 20 seconds of my message. It's like being hooked up to a psychic battery or something like this, as there was a very strong surge of energy, and I received a picture in my mind of a face. And it looked like a typical Sasquatch face, but it was very intense. Instantly, it started to communicate with me. Not in English words, but in feelings. It was so intense that it hurt my mind. And after about 5 seconds, I had to disconnect mentally. After it was over, I laid there in my sleeping bag in a sort of a disbelief. What the F just happened? Was that really them? Did I just somehow make all that up? I lay there for probably 30 minutes or so, having this internal debate with myself, wondering what the hell that was. I did feel like there was a message coming back to me, but I did not understand it. And after a while, I ended up falling asleep. Sometime later in the night, I was suddenly awoken by something. I didn't hear anything, and I couldn't see anything because it was pitch black out. I laid there trying to listen to any possible noise or movement outside, and the next thing that happened, I felt the top of my tent being pushed down from above. My ex-wife and son were laying right next to me, and I knew that they were still asleep and were not moving. The tent was slowly being pushed down from the outside, and I became petrified. My first thought was that it was a crazy human being trying to get into the tent and to get us. I did not instantly think it was a Sasquatch, but another human with a possible horrible intent. For some reason, I instantly called out to Sasquatch to help us. With all my might, I shouted out a telepathic message for their assistance, and I projected my need to them. And instantly that intense connection happened again, and the face was there. But this time the communication was understandable. It's kind of like a mental download at first. I instantly knew the one communicating with me was a leader of a clan of Sasquatch that they had heard my messages the previous day. The sense I got from them was that they were perplexed and amazed that a human had made contact with them in this way, as they had never experienced a human reaching out like this before. So they were very intrigued and curious about this human. He told me, and it was a he, that they heard my request to visit, and so they did. The clan wanted to see the human that could do this. I think I read this, but I'm in. Again, it was a long time ago. This, of course, terrified me. But before I could adequately respond, this being said to me, "We know that you are afraid, and we think it is admirable of you to try to contact us in a friendly manner despite your deep personal fear of us." With that, I felt the pressure relieved off of the tent, and the being told me that I do not need to be afraid. One of them wanted to wake me up, but not by making noises. They just wanted my attention and not to wake everyone else up in the tent. I then felt this peace come over me, and the voice said, quote, "We will watch over you and your family tonight. You'll be very protected, so rest well, and thank you for your messages." The connection was broken at that point, and it was over. I heard nothing outside but the river in the distance. And I laid there, again, thinking to myself, did I just lose my mind? Did I just make all that up in my head? That had to be real, right? I honestly didn't know what to think about it, but still felt this great peace, and sometime soon thereafter, I fell asleep. That morning I was the first to awaken with a full bladder and had to go pretty bad. Excuse me. I immediately thought about the events the night before and again did not know what to think about it all. Was that real? Well, at that moment, I had to pee like a racehorse and carefully got out of my bag, unzipped the tent to get out. I stood up looking outside in the early morning light and I gasped. My gasp woke up my partner and she said, "What is it? What's wrong?" And all I could say was, "Look at this." So she got up and looked outside the tent, and directly to the east of the tent, about a foot away, was this little trench that was dug into the ground. It was about 3 inches wide, 3 inches deep, and about 8 feet long, gouged into the ground. A straight line. My ex saw it and gasped herself. That wasn't there last night. And she was right. The whole area we had set up the tent was clear and unblemished. It was why we had set up the tent in that location. And sometime during the night, this line was dug into the ground. There were no fallen tree branches or any logical way to explain how that trench was placed there in the middle of the night. I looked all around the area for any tracks or signs of anything, but there was nothing. I still have no idea why that was placed there during the night. Was it a line of demarcation? Do not cross this line? Was it placed there to help me realize that I did not make this up in my head? I tend to believe that that was the reason behind it. I told my ex-wife all that had happened the previous night, and after seeing the trench for herself, she believed me. She told me that later that the previous evening she felt like she was being watched, but disregarded it. Is there any proof of this encounter? No. It's just my experience. It's not meant to try to convince anyone, and I don't doubt there'll be lots of naysayers who will crap on this woo encounter. I know what happened to me, and I'm a very mentally stable, happy individual. I know it's hard enough for people to believe in the existence of Sasquatch itself, let alone an encounter like this. That reality is not lost on me. I am my own greatest critic and skeptic, yet I swear on my life that this is true and would be happy to take a polygraph test over it. I have 2 other encounters that are somewhat similar to this one, both of which were more unnerving than this one. It's not easy to share these things because I understand how it may seem to others who haven't experienced anything close to this. Psychic phenomena itself is ridiculed by most people. So how much more a psychic interaction with a damn Sasquatch? If it hadn't happened to me, I would be skeptical too. Thanks for allowing me to share my crazy experience. Again, I'm not trying to convince anyone out here. I'm just sharing this to possibly help others who have had very woo experiences, and for them to know that they are not alone. Hopefully my encounters will help encourage others to tell their extra weird Bigfoot experiences too. Now this is titled My Third Encounter. This experience I'm about to share with you happened to me in 2011 while camping near Mount Pilchuck, east of Granite Falls in Washington State. Mount Pilchuck is one of the largest mountains in our area that has a trail going all the way to the top. It can be seen on a clear day from Seattle and is beautiful to behold. Although it may be a beautiful place, it certainly has an odd feeling to the surrounding area. Having hiked and camped on the mountain several times, it has always had an ominous feel to it, especially at night. Well, during the spring of 2011, I decided to take my 8-year-old son camping over a weekend and chose Mount Pilchuck to explore. While driving up the mountain, there are various turnoffs of old abandoned logging roads that lead away from the mountain and that go on for miles and miles. I decided to take one of these old roads and see where it went. It went on and on for miles with no place to turn around. And after about 20 minutes of driving, we finally came to a point in the road where there was a steep drop-off to the north and a steep hill going up to the south and a tree bent over the road in an upside-down U shape that blocked further travel. Big gust of wind out there. Thankfully, there was enough space about 100 feet in front of the tree to be able to carefully turn around. And before we did that, we drove right up the strange tree that was bent over the road. We got out of the car to take a look around and examine it. And I have to say, first off, that as soon as we got out of the car, I felt like we were being watched. We walked up to the tree, and I had noticed something on the ground, on the road, right in front of it. And it was woman's clothing. A pink jacket, denim pants, underwear, and a shirt. And it seemed intentionally placed. Looking at the clothing and looking around just made my skin crawl. Now, this was before David Plattis' first books on missing 411 came out, but I was still aware of all the missing people in the national forests under strange circumstances from my own research into the matter. But it wasn't at the forefront of my mind as it is today. So, the clothing being this far out in the middle of nowhere was very strange and creepy. I kept how I felt to myself as I did not want to possibly scare my little boy. And I said to my son, let's walk further down the road past the tree. And so we bent under the road. So we bent under the tree and started walking. Immediately, we both felt really strange, like we were walking on someone else's property, and we both got the chills. My son said, let's go back. And I was happy to oblige. And as soon as we got back to the other side of the tree, it felt much better and safer. It was really strange. At my son's suggestion, he pointed out a nice little place off of the side of the road where we could pitch our tent for the night. And after feeling it out with my intuition, I felt it was not an ideal place, but it was safe enough. I really was uneasy about it, but I also knew that I had a habit of psyching myself out of camping because of my past experiences with Sasquatch. I asked how my son felt, as he is very intuitive, even at that young age, and he said he felt fine with camping here. So that was good enough for me. We set up camp and started a fire, had a nice meal, and enjoyed the experience of it all. I still felt like we were being watched that whole time, but it did not feel threatening or overly ominous. The sun set and we settled down to sleep in our tent for the night. My son fell asleep fairly quickly, but I stayed up just listening to the light drizzle that began, and that lasted the entire night. And at some point, I fell asleep and awoke in the middle of the night to buzzing sounds in my ears, and I could not move. I could open my eyes, but I could not make any sounds or move any parts of my body. The moon must have been fairly full, as there was enough light during the night to be able to see just a little. I became frightened, because although I was awake, I was not able to move whatsoever. As I was laying there, unable to move, I heard footsteps come walking from south side of the tent, where the road and the inclining hill was, and the steps came right up to the tent. I was lying there, unable to move. I sensed pressure on the tent and felt what seemed like hands pressing down onto my feet from outside the tent. Like whatever it was knew where my feet were and pressed down from outside and applied maybe 20 pounds of pressure to my feet and ankles. I was absolutely petrified and tried my hardest to cry out to my son, who was sleeping peacefully right next to me. The buzzing sound in my ears was almost deafening. After about 10 seconds of this pressure on my feet, I felt it let off and heard the tent move back into normal position, and the footsteps walked away to the north, down the steep embankment. About 10 or 15 seconds after the footsteps could no longer be heard, the paralysis suddenly disappeared and I could move again. I sat up in a frenzy and grabbed my machete that I always take with me in the wild and checked on my son, and he was sound asleep and he seemed fine. I sat up trying to process what in the hell just happened to me and was trying to figure out if what I had experienced was just a dream or not. I did get my flashlight and looked outside of the tent for a bit, but saw no indications of anything unusual or any tracks. So I sat up for quite some time after that, just listening, trying to hear anything like footsteps, but eventually I ended up falling asleep again after convincing myself that it must have just been a very strange dream. Sometime later that night I woke up again with buzzing in my ears and unable to move for a second time. I was laying on my back, and although I could not move, I could still move my eyes. I tried desperately to call out to my son to wake him up, thinking that if I could wake him up, he could somehow snap me out of this paralysis. I could let out the tiniest moan, but that was it. Then I heard the footsteps again and saw the silhouette of something moving outside the tent, and then the tent being pressed down and the pressure on my feet and ankles. This time, it definitely felt like large hands pressing directly down. I was screaming inside, and I did everything I could to break free, but I could not. Then, after what seemed like minutes, but was probably only seconds, the pressure released off of my legs, and the tent popped back to its normal position, and I heard footsteps again walk off down the steep incline, down the mountain to the north. And then I snapped out of it again. I sat up in a frenzy and tried to process everything that had happened. After checking on my son, who seemed just fine, I had to make the decision whether to stay or not. I did not want to go out there in the rain, in the darkness, and in some ways, I felt safer inside our little tent than going out and jumping in the car, which is only 30 feet away. I made the decision to stay and face this fear and wasn't going to let myself be scared away. Besides, I still wasn't convinced that it wasn't just a strange dream. But after happening twice in a row, I wasn't so sure. Regardless, I decided not to pack up and to stick it out. So my intuition was not screaming at me to leave, so I felt like I needed to stick it out. Again, after quite a while of sitting up and listening to the gentle rain, I soon fell asleep. And the next thing I remember was waking up a little, where you are half asleep and half awake and notice lights coming down the logging road toward us, like another vehicle is coming down the road towards the bent tree. And I remember seeing the lights outside passing by the tent and continuing down the road past the tree. I remember thinking to myself that it was strange they did not turn around, because there was not any way anyone could have drove past the tree. I don't know why this didn't wake me up as being fully conscious. I would have jumped up and looked outside in a heartbeat, but I didn't. I fell back asleep again. I was wakened again a third time with buzzing in my ears and unable to move, and everything happened just like before, although I was laying on my right side again. Same footsteps, same pressure through the tent and on my feet. Same walking away, and then the paralysis instantly disappearing. Thankfully, after this last event, I could tell that dawn was just starting, so I immediately started packing up everything I could, and when it became light enough outside to see the car without a flashlight, I got my son up and put him in the car and I locked it. Then quickly took down the tent and threw everything in the trunk as quickly as I could, and I got out of there. Before I left, though, I looked all over carefully to see if I could see any tracks or anything else. There was nothing. Later on that day, after getting home, I called the Snohomish County Sheriff's Department, non-emergency number, and I told them about this strange clothing I found, and they gave me the number to a sheriff deputy who was assigned to patrolling Mount Pilchuck State Park. I called him and had a fascinating 2-hour conversation with this man. I will withhold his name, but when I told him about the strange woman's clothing, he seemed very interested in this and could tell that he was taking quite a bit of notes. And during our conversation, we talked about all kinds of interesting things, but he never told me about a homeless man. But he told me about a homeless man who was living near the bottom of the mountain at Mount Pilchuck State Park, and although he was homeless, he did not seem mentally unfit or doing drugs at all. Well, they found his naked body deceased at the very top of the mountain. After receiving the body, they visited his little camp, and it looked like the clothes that he was wearing were carefully folded and laid out. But the strange thing was that his feet were not dirty or seemed to be marked up at all, as you would expect if someone walked up an entire mountain barefoot. When I asked him how the homeless man died, he said that the apparent cause was from exposure, even though it was in the middle of summer when it had happened. When I first heard Dave Plattis on Coast to Coast AM back in 2012, on his first Missing 411 interview, I immediately thought of that poor homeless man. I did not tell him about my strange experience the night before, but I did ask him if he had ever gotten calls from people seeing Sasquatch on the mountain, and he responded in a very surprising way. Oh yeah, it happens pretty regularly. Like it was no big deal to him. I asked him if he believed in Sasquatch, and again he said, oh, they're definitely real, in a nonchalant way. He gave me the impression that he did not want to elaborate on that. He seemed very open and honest and was surprisingly willing to talk and answer my questions. I gave him explicit directions to where this woman's clothes were, and he told me that they were going to go check it out. And if they came across anything further regarding the clothing, they'd give me a call. And he never did. Now, excuse me, I feel this is the strangest part of the whole thing. And out of sheer curiosity, about a week later, I decided to go back to Mount Pilchuck and see if the clothes were still there. Going up the winding mountain road, I finally came to the turnoff where the old logging road was that I had gone down, and it had been completely sealed off. Not just with a gate or a concrete barricade, but with tons and tons of rock and gravel. At least 6 feet high from the original road, and it went back at least 100 feet. There's some effort. They completely obliterated that area so that nothing could get back in there, at least with vehicles. There were signs posted that said, no trespassing or hiking allowed. Was it all just a coincidence? Was it all related? I have the distinct feeling that it is definitely related. I think they knew something bad was happening back in that section of woods, and they did everything they could to cut it off for anyone to venture down. This, along with the missing 411 case, is all very strange. Should I go number? Oh, we got a lot here. Holy. Hold on a minute. Where did I just lost my spot. All right, I'm going to go one more chunk, and then we'll finish up tomorrow, right? This past summer, my son and a bunch of his friends wanted to go up Mount Pilchuck at night after I told them about my experience there. You know how kids are. They wanted to get freaked out a little bit and wanted me to take them up as a group and see if anything happens. We went about halfway up the mountain to where a main trailhead is, and we just sat and listened. We did get out and went into the woods a little ways, but stayed close together as a group, as I had educated them all about missing 411. And we started hearing voices in the woods. Indistinct, mumbling voices just out of range of the flashlights. It was enough for the kids to get sufficiently spooked, and we headed back down the mountain in a hurry. There's definitely something out in those woods. I didn't know if it was a Sasquatch that did that to me in the tent, as I have no proof that it was. But my gut tells me that it was them, and that the message was telling me to definitely not move beyond that point. Like the pressure on my feet was saying, don't walk any further. Was them protecting us? If so, from what? It is all very strange, and I have many questions. And since I had that face-to-face encounter as a child, and my first woo experience I wrote to you about previously, I feel like the Sasquatch have had my back, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. When I have had direct or indirect encounters with them, they usually seem very unnerving and even downright terrifying at the time. But there's never been anything nefarious in my experiences. They show over and over again that they are extraordinarily intelligent and are far superior to us in probably every way, especially with the context of being in the wild. It is very possible that these beings are, quote, protectors of the forest, end quote, in ways we just do not understand. Maybe one of their functions is keeping other even more mysterious or more dangerous unknown predators at bay. If my experience above was a Sasquatch person, it could have easily harmed me and my son, but it didn't. It could have even scared me much, much more effectively, but it did not. It did send a message loud and clear, though, to not go any further. These beings may very well be protecting us by scaring us out of a location. Sometimes, I know that can be hard to wrap our heads around, especially for those who have had frightening experiences with them. But these frightening encounters that we might have with them may have a deeper story behind it that we are unable to see. I suggest it is definitely a possibility that the Sasquatch people may be protectors in ways that is hard for us to understand. It's just something to ponder. Thanks, Steve, for the opportunity to share my experiences, even if they may be more woo than most of other encounters. And I have one more direct face-to-face encounter that I will share after this. That is the shortest of them all, but is still very strange and unnerving. Thank you, my friend, for doing all that you do. All right. Now that is, again, a chunk of writing coming up. So let me mark that. Hold on a second. I'm losing my spot here. All right. I'll share. I didn't read that. I don't remember having this much, one email before ever. And I'm not complaining. I'm all over it. But I got stuff to do, and I only give myself so much time per day to get all of you heard. So I will continue right away tomorrow with the rest of this email, and I'll hopefully get a whole bunch more shared with all of you too at the same time. So there. Things happen at the same time. I don't know, man. There's so much bizarreness in there, but there's so much in there that has been shared with all of us through hundreds of people before this, right? The tent being pushed down, feeling the paralysis thing is so common with these experiences. It's silly. Somebody else being present, not waking up. The tent being pushed down, feeling something touching my head, touching my arm, touching my feet. Felt like huge hands. It's been heard before. How many times, right? Everything going quiet. I can't move. Thinking it was a dream. Because everybody dreams this all the time around the world, right? I said nobody ever. Anyway. I'm on a ride. I'm on a few different rides in life. Each day, all day, as we go through here, that I don't share too much about here. But believe me, I'm on a few other rides that are leading up to sharing. But in the meantime, I'm just saying that so you all know. And in the meantime, at the same time, I'm not going to stop getting everyone heard. I don't give a shit if we've heard the same flavor of email or not. I don't care. We're going to get everyone heard, all right? It's very, very important. And hopefully, hopefully the majority of the people following this channel aren't here just to be entertained, and you're actually here to learn and figure this shit out together, right? And that's what we're doing. And we have come a long way compared to a lot of people when it comes to this topic, only because we're listening to each other, right? Anyway, there you go. It's funny. I don't know why. I think one quick memory came back during that email of the repetitiveness and the how it can't be a dream. It just brought me back to that memory when I flew to the Yukon, met a friend there. I brought my camera gear and jumped in. What did we do? We paid somebody to give us a ride to the middle of frickin' nowhere in northwestern tip of British Columbia, the Tachishini. We jumped out, hiked into the mountains. And a couple days in, we found this old cabin, small one. We stayed in it, and it was, I'll never forget, it was 9 p.m. 9 p.m. Never really gets dark up there that late, that time of year. And I didn't have a rifle, my partner did, had a cannon. And something's shaking that cabin. Not a violent shake, but it's shaking. It's moving. I'm like, you feel that? And there's a window right there. And that window would have been 8 feet off the ground probably, because the cabin, you had to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 steps into the cabin, probably for snow load, right? So it was up off the ground. So that made the window of the cabin probably 3 feet over me, and I'm just over 6 foot. I'm 6'1". Anyway, I was dreading looking out that window in a way, because there's no curtains on. I'm like, oh God, here we go. But I couldn't see anything out the window. And then I thought, well, maybe there's a big bear bouncing off the side of the cabin or whatever. So I grabbed the rifle and I kicked the door open. Nothing. And then my buddy just wrote it off as probably a slight tremor, earthquake. Yeah, probably. And then we carried on, took off in another direction for about 3 or 4 more days. And on the way back, we stayed at this little cabin again. It's an old outfitter cabin. We stayed in the cabin again. And 9 o'clock at night, the frickin' thing was shook again. We're talking right on time. My heart was frickin' beating out of my chest. I grabbed the rifle. Again, I kicked the door open, looked all around. Nothing there. And there's no timber. We're above tree line, so I don't know why. That memory just came to mind while reading this email. But anyways, John Blatt, I'm sure you're here with us still. I'm guessing. Hope so. I don't know what else you've had happen since last emailing me here, but I think it might have been a while. But if you have got some new information, knowledge, experiences, and you want to, if you got the time to share it, please do. I'd love to hear from you again, man. Or even, who knows, maybe we could even do I'm starting to do some face-to-face conversations with people. So maybe even we could do a Zoom thing and share with the people if you want. Maybe we can do that too. And if you're interested, drop me an email, all right? Share my story at howtohunt.com. And I'll be back tomorrow. And we're going to get more voices heard and the rest of that email heard. All right? Meantime, what day is it now? Wednesday? It's the big red heart day. Valentine's Day. I got my hands busy. Got 2 ladies here. Mother and daughter. I'll be taking them somewhere for dinner tonight, I guess. And then carrying on. So next weekend, Sarah's doing her next shop with the membership drive money. We're going to feed more kids. And we'll give you guys I'll just do a quick update on that each time we do it, so you know. All right? What else? Sarah's got her sale on in her store still. She has a fair amount. Not a fair amount. She's got some stuff left, and she's going to clear that out, and then she's got some new, real cool things coming to put in her store to make available. So that link's down below as well. There you go. I'm done. I've shared everything I am going to today. I gotta get moving. I'm a babbling dude. This is like my 1, 2, 3, maybe my 30.5 hours of talking straight this morning. And I might be doing a 2-hour Zoom this evening. Back tomorrow.